got some people flying in. Thank you everyone for being here tonight. Welcome, welcome. While we're waiting for people to arrive, if you want to put into the chat, let us know where was the last place that you saw a bald eagle. The chat button is down at the bottom. And if you've seen one recently, I just saw one on the Connecticut River last weekend. So let us know if you've seen one recently in your neighborhood or in the States, or if you've traveled anywhere. Maybe there's someplace else. Or maybe you've been someplace else. All right, we're up to, let's see, 23. We've got about 75 people registered for tonight, so I'm just going to give everybody 1 minute to come in. But while they do, I'm going to go ahead and start introducing myself anyway. Thank you all for joining us tonight for our author talk with Tina Morris. My name is Melissa Gallagher Smith, and I am the Development Director for Connecticut Audubon Society. I will be turning the talk over to Tina Morris, but before I do, I want to have just a couple of housekeeping notes to share with you. The first is that I will be keeping everyone on mute for the duration of the webinar, but if you have any questions, please feel free to put them into the chat. And we will have a Q&A opportunity at the end of Tina's talk so that we can get to some of those questions for you. And we will try to answer as many as we can. Next, I want you all to know that we are recording this webinar. So if you would like to turn off your screen, please do so now. The recording will begin, actually it's already started, so that's good. You will be able to find a recording of tonight's conversation in our member portal, but please give it a couple of days before you go searching for it, because sometimes it takes a while to edit and get it uploaded. If you have any questions about accessing the member portal or becoming a member, please feel free to message me or my partner, Deb Eccleston, who is your Connecticut Audubon membership manager. And there will also be an email follow-up tomorrow or the day after, just with a link to the webinar, and then just a thank you for joining us. Finally, there is a caption feature that is available on Zoom. So if you kind of hover over the screen, you'll see something that says show captions, and that's pretty good if you have trouble hearing or just would like to be able to read along. But that's about it for us for Connecticut Audubon. I do want to say that this is a member-only webinar that we're offering for membership month. So I want to thank all of you for being members and for joining us tonight. And with that, I will let Deb Eccleston take over and introduce our guest.
All right. As Melissa was just saying, it is membership month. So I want to thank every single one of you, all our members. It makes such a difference. Your support and their conservation, everything that you do for Connecticut Audubon, for the birds, for nature, for Connecticut itself is amazing. And it makes me proud to be a membership manager here at Connecticut Audubon Society. So I want to thank Tina Morris very much for coming tonight and presenting on her book. I read it, enjoyed it thoroughly. I loved every part about it, and I can't wait to hear her presentation. So, Tina Morris, the book is Return to the Sky, the surprising story of how one woman and 7 eaglets helped restore the bald eagle. She is an undergrad of Oberlin College and a graduate degree from Cornell University in ornithology and wildlife biology. So welcome, Tina. Thank you again so much for presenting tonight. If you want to share your screen.
Okay, hopefully everybody can see that.
Looks good.
Thank you so much, Deb, for the nice introduction, and I am delighted to be here tonight. It is such an honor to be invited to speak to Connecticut Audubon about my book, Return to the Sky, the story of the bald eagles I was trying to save almost 50 years ago. Tonight, I will be focusing on those eagles and the project that brought them back to the Northeast and to Connecticut. If you read the book, you can find out how my life was changed by the program, and it certainly was. But for now, the 7 eaglets will take center stage, and just like their spectacular relatives, who now range throughout the Northeast, they do this very well. And just the 1970s were a time of magic in bird conservation, and this talk is dedicated to those who made it happen. It is also a positive story, which we all probably need to hear today in light of the recent reports of bird decline. There's another reason why it's an honor to speak to you tonight. As some of you might know, on Christmas Eve 2024, nearly 9 months ago, President Biden signed a bill designating the bald eagle our national bird. Many of us, including me, had thought it was already our national bird. But a dedicated supporter of the National Eagle Center in Wabasha, Minnesota, Preston Cook, discovered the government had never officially named it as such. With the help of Amy Klobuchar, the senator from Minnesota, he was able to convince both houses of Congress, and that's saying a lot these days, to pass legislation which made it to the president's desk just before he was to leave office. We can now accurately refer to the eagle as the nation's bird and have Preston Cook to thank for this effort. The saga of the bald eagle's return was inextricably tied to that of the peregrine falcon. Without its smaller and faster friend to set the pace, the success of the Eagle Project might not have been so auspicious. The raptor biologists who were responsible for the reintroduction of the peregrine in 1973 became the central force behind the restoration of the eagle 3 years later. The story of the eagle and peregrine began in Ithaca in central New York State, home to Cornell University. Perched on the southern end of Cayuga Lake, one of the Finger Lakes, so named for their long and skinny shapes, Cornell was known for its world-renowned laboratory of ornithology. By the 1970s, it had also become the epicenter for raptor reintroductions. We need to back up a decade, however, to the seminal event that started everything. In 1962, a marine biologist named Rachel Carson wrote Silent Spring, the book that sounded the alarm about the lethal effects of the pesticide DDT. At the time, few biologists paid attention to Carson, partly because of her doomsday predictions and partly because of her gender. Women were scarce in science at the time, which made it easy for the scientific community to dismiss her. It was her findings about DDT, a long-lasting pesticide used to combat malaria in World War II, that made Carson a main character in the bald eagle story. She discovered that DDT wasn't just killing the mosquitoes it was meant to control, but was breaking down into its metabolite DDE, which was absorbed by the algae, fish, and other aquatic organisms consumed by birds. Once ingested, DDE interfered with the calcium metabolism of the bird's eggs, resulting in thinner shells and breakage as soon as the birds tried to incubate them. Although all birds were being affected, the ones most at risk were those at the top of the food chain, the ospreys, pelicans, and bald eagles who eat fish, and the peregrine falcons who eat smaller birds, who were in turn eating insect seeds and other foods contaminated with the poison. Through a process called biomagnification, the pesticide was consumed by species at each trophic level. The concentration increased with every step up the food chain until its final and top destination, the predators. Sadly, Rachel Carson died of cancer at the age of 56, only 2 years after her book was published. But her findings had been corroborated by scientists of the U.S. Geological Survey's Patuxent Wildlife Research Center in Maryland. The bird world was shocked by the truth that explained the decline of so many of their beloved species. Carson's cause was taken up by a group of people with personal interests in the raptors affected by DDT, particularly peregrine falcons. In 1965, led by a falconer named Joe Hickey, a professor at the University of Wisconsin, a conference was held in Madison to discuss the problem. At that meeting, the Raptor Research Foundation was born. The 1970s became the age of enlightenment as the federal government took up the cause of environmental degradation. Under Richard Nixon, whose administration, unbeknownst to many, had a strong commitment to the environment, legislation began to be passed to curb our decline. In 1970, Joe Hickey organized a second meeting in Madison, this time to call for the ban of DDT. In December of that year, the EPA was established to be the watchdog for clean air and water. Although DDT wasn't officially banned until 1972, the race was on to save the birds. Preparing the stage further to restore species like the peregrine and eagle was the passage of the Endangered Species Act of 1973, protecting not only the species but also their habitat. Let me introduce the fathers of falconry. Three men were most instrumental in addressing the plight of peregrines. Tom Cade was a falconer and ornithology professor, then at Syracuse University, before he moved on to Cornell. Heinz Meng, who was mastering the art of captive breeding of falcons at SUNY New Paltz, and of course, Joe Hickey. Although the falconry world was close-knit and everyone helped each other as they considered how to save the peregrine, it was Tom Cade who established the program that would bring it back. He moved from Syracuse to Cornell with a stipulation that he could house a captive breeding facility in Ithaca. Because there were no peregrines left in the Northeast, it was vital that he captive breed subspecies from other regions. Dr. Cade created a facility known to the Cornell community as the Hawk Barn, right down the road from the Lab of Ornithology. The barn was divided into flight cages with nesting ledges to resemble the peregrine's natural eyries. Here, the art of artificial insemination was mastered, although excited male falcons forced their handlers to wear some self-defense equipment like this modified helmet with a lip around it to catch the semen while protecting their heads. The peregrine program used hacking, a training technique borrowed from falconry whereby young birds are raised and released without parents. Sometimes these young falcons can be bred in captivity or taken from the nest at a young age. In the latter case, the birds have imprinted or identified with their parents before their release, so they will mature and live as members of their species. The Peregrine Falcon program placed young falcons into hacking boxes where they were fed and protected by human attendants who stayed out of sight as much as possible until they were ready to fly and catch food on their own. The hack boxes were placed in areas that most closely replicated peregrine's natural habitat, such as cliff sides or ledges, towers, and later bridges, when the releases moved to cities in order to avoid the predators like animals like great horned owls and raccoons who would grab the young at night. The peregrine releases, begun in 1973, served as the model for the Bald Eagle Project. Having witnessed the success of the Peregrine program, New York State's Department of Environmental Conservation foresaw the year 1976 as an ideal time to bring the eagle back from the brink of extinction. By then, DDT had decimated its populations in all states of the Northeast, except for a few breeding pairs still left in Maine. Patriotic fever was running high, and nobody could imagine celebrating the bicentennial without what they believed to be at the time their national bird. After its ban in 1972, DDT was detected in fish declined precipitously. By the mid-1970s, the bald eagle's former habitat had become clean enough to receive birds again. Although almost gone from the sky, the eagle's image was ubiquitous, appearing on our currency, on sports team logos. Of course, the Philadelphia Eagles probably won the Super Bowl with the eagle logo on their helmets. And of course, on our national seal, despite Ben Franklin's disdain for the eagle, which he considered a bad moral character, supposedly because of its scavenger nature. The turkey and other contenders didn't stand a chance against the grandeur of the bald eagle when our forefathers had to select a symbol of freedom, majesty, and power to represent the newly independent USA. By 1976, in the lower 48 states, eagles had been reduced to 417 pairs, a number too low to sustain the species. According to the terms of the Endangered Species Act, the federal government controlled the bald eagle, so New York needed permission from the Department of the Interior to launch a reintroduction program. DEC's proposal to release eagles was denied due to the state agency not having any raptor biologists on staff who could lead it. Enter Tom Cade and his young and inexperienced wannabe graduate student, me. I had arrived at Cornell to pursue my dream of working with birds of prey and Dr. Cade. But when he told me I needed a funded program to be accepted as one of his students, my dreams started to plummet. Then, by pure serendipity, I had a chance meeting with the two Fish and Wildlife administrators in Washington in charge of the defunct Eagle proposal, and things took a sudden turn. They asked Dr. Cade to head the program for eagles due to his expertise with reintroducing peregrines. If I would be willing to work with the eagles, Dr. Cade said, he would agree to supervise the project, and the eagle program would be possible. A deal was made and the project began officially in June 1976, but the ground began to be laid the previous fall. The first order of business was to find a suitable site in New York from which to reintroduce the eagles. Montezuma National Wildlife Refuge near Seneca Falls at the northern end of Cayuga Lake was selected. Montezuma met all the requirements needed for a release site. Food would be plentiful in the 10,000-acre wetland complex where marsh, rivers, and open water were prevalent. The presence of a wide variety of water birds and fish guaranteed its food potential for young bald eagles as well as for adults returning eventually to breed. Protection of the young eaglets was paramount, so the release site had to be able to be cordoned off and made inaccessible to the public. Clark's Ridge, a hilltop overlooking Shockey Pool, the largest water body in the marsh, was hidden amidst a labyrinth of dirt roads that traversed farmland around the refuge, making it impossible to locate it. Luckily, this was before the days of GPS and Google Maps. It was important that the site be near Cornell so the peregrine team could be available for emergencies in case I needed them. The drive from Ithaca to the refuge took less than an hour. Bald eagles prefer to nest in tall trees with strong branches, which the young use as practice perches when they are learning to fly. Nests are often built in the V formed by these branches. The adults like to be able to see around them, so height and being on the edge of the forest is important. Montezuma had many hardwoods surrounding the wetland areas, perfect for future nests. Once the site was chosen, the next dilemma was finding a source for young eaglets that could be transported to New York. Because there was no sustainable population left in any of the surrounding states, it would be necessary to go further afield to find an area where DDT hadn't left its mark. Alaska had plenty of bald eagles, but the genetic makeup of this much larger subspecies was thought to be too different to take a chance on. Instead, the program looked to the Midwest, particularly the Great Lakes states of Wisconsin, Michigan, and Minnesota, where DDT hadn't been used as it had in the Northeast, and where a healthy population of bald eagles could be found. Bald eagles generally lay 3 eggs and try to rear 3 young. However, because of food supply and energy expenditure, often the third eaglet is smaller and weaker than its siblings and doesn't make it. They are either thrown from the nest or pushed aside by the stronger ones until they starve. Therefore, the plan was to select the third eaglet from these 3 bird nests for transport. When the climbers scaled the nest trees to band the young eaglets at about 7 weeks of age, it was up to them to determine which birds to remove. The position of the nest tower in the refuge was critical. Not only did it have to be hidden from the public, but it had to be high enough for the young birds to survey the land around them, near tall trees they could use as perches once they started to fly, and most of all, near the water. Clark's Ridge met all these criteria. The local electric company donated and installed 4 35-foot-high poles for the tower, on top of which we constructed a 7-foot platform. My peregrine team colleagues, Jim Weaver and Willard Heck, and I had to think like eagle parents and build a nest for them, closely resembling the one that they had left behind in Wisconsin. The next step was to create a canvas blind or hide next to the platform so I could observe and feed the birds without them seeing me. The blind was barely large enough for me to sit in cross-legged. On the side facing the nest was a hole through which I could feed the young eagles with a long barbecue fork without having them see me so they wouldn't view humans as their food providers, a dangerous situation for both species. At first, I had to climb to the platform using metal pegs like those used by electric linemen. But once the scaffolding was up, my ascent became far easier and a bit less scary. We wrapped aluminum predator guards around the poles to prevent animals like raccoons from reaching the vulnerable young birds. The day finally came on June 18, 1976, when Wisconsin Fish and Wildlife climbers called to say they had 2 eaglets ready to ship to New York. Arriving at Syracuse Airport in 2 separate crates, the birds known as W1 and W2, W for Wisconsin, 1 for a female and 2 for the male, were retrieved by federal officials and driven to the refuge an hour away. On hand to receive the eaglets was a large contingent of state, federal, and refuge people, a few biologists from Cornell, Tom Cade, and me and my 2 dogs, Max and Moses. While most of the entourage stood at the base of the tower looking up, Dr. Cade tied the ropes around the crates, Jim Weaver hauled them up to the top of the tower, and Dr. Cade and I then pried open the tops and released them. The eaglets had been shrieking while in the crates with their call-like cry until they were able to jump onto their new nest and seek shelter in the corner of the platform as far away from their captors as possible. These were not cuddly tame birds who wanted to be friends, and for this we were all grateful. They had to have a healthy fear of humans if they were to survive. After the eaglets settled down and the crowd dispersed, I was left alone on the hillside with my dogs, wondering how on earth the eagles and I were going to survive the next 3 months. The first order of business was to set up my campsite, including my tent, my camp stove, and all the paraphernalia required to take care of the birds. To observe the eagles, even when I wasn't up in the blind, I had a remote video camera with a monitor in the tent. The picture was a bit fuzzy by modern standards, but at least I could see that they were okay. Many of you have experienced more advanced technology, especially if you have tuned into any of the Eagles cams throughout the country or in Big Bear Valley, California, where thousands of viewers focused on the pair, Jackie and Shadow, hatching eggs after 2 years of failure. 2 out of 3 of their nestlings fledged last spring to great fanfare. Often these images are so clear you feel like you were in the nest with the birds. The next order of business was to feed the young birds. The marshes were teeming with carp, but I had to catch them and stockpile them so that they would be available for 2 meals a day. In the first year, fish were plentiful and I trapped them in a spillway. Then I removed them to a large cage in the water where I could net them whenever I had to. In the next year, however, a severe drought decimated the carp, and I had to enlist the help and friendship of local fishermen to restock my supply. Eagles are opportunistic feeders, so although fish is a mainstay of their diet, they eat small mammals and water birds as well as scavenge for carrion. To give them a balanced diet and introduce them to the varied prey items and delicacies that awaited them in the real world, I had to find roadkill. I spent hours driving the roads around the refuge, picking up rabbits, squirrels, muskrats, woodchucks, snakes, and other tasty morsels. By the way, rabbits were the food of choice. I knew we had to be able to track the eaglets when they left the nest, so banding and equipping them with radios became the next step before they fledged. Surveillance methods, especially for eagles, were in their infancy in 1976, so everything we did was trial and error. With Jim Weaver's help and experience and lots of experimenting, we eventually worked out how to attach a short-term radio to the eagles and to put colored tags on their wings that could withstand the weather and be seen from a distance. Because of their dependence on flight for hunting and migration, it was essential to ensure these apparatuses didn't interfere with their wing movement. We had to modify things from 76 to 77 as we were able to see what worked best and what didn't. My issue was going to be restraining the eagles, especially when I had to handle them alone. For this, I experimented with several body wraps, but what worked best in the end, believe it or not, was my blue jeans. I cut off the leg, and its tapering shape was a perfect fit for an eagle, kind of like a straitjacket. He couldn't move his wings, and with his talons wrapped with electrical tape and his beak unable to reach my hands, he was safe and secure, as was I. After spending my days watching and recording the eaglet's behavior from the blind, I noticed a significant increase in their energy level. Increasingly more restless and energetic, they began hopping all over the platform, flapping their wings as they practiced their pre-flight maneuvers, and even banging their heads on the top of the enclosure as they started to gain altitude. It was finally time to remove the bars before they hurt themselves and let them out on the perch that we had nailed to the tower. Before long, they made their first flight. I had little time, however, to celebrate as they spread their wings for the first time. Like all young creatures, first steps, or in this case flights, are a bit shaky. An eagle's size works against it when first taking off, so it looks like an out-of-control helicopter looking for a landing place. This usually was into the marsh far below the hillside, its thick cattail stands interspersed with small pools of water. Without wind to help with lift, the young eagles couldn't become airborne, so were stuck. If they had had parents, they would have fed on the ground and watched over them until their wings were stronger. But it was up to me to find them, catch them, and return them to their nest on top of the tower for a second and sometimes third or fourth try. Hauling a struggling eagle under one arm while gripping the ladder with the other was never an easy task. Eventually, they did grow stronger and were able to reach a perch either on one of the trees near the nest or the dead snags in the marsh. The 1976 eaglets spent a few months exploring the areas inside and outside the refuge, learning how to catch their own food until hunting season in October. Then they left the refuge for good, leaving me to wonder if they would survive all the threats that awaited them in the outside world. Once their radio batteries died after 3 weeks, there was no way to follow them, so all I could do was hope. In late winter and spring of 1977, we began to prepare for the next group of eagles. The decision to hack 4 birds had been made. The scaffolding had to be removed so a second nest platform could be built. The blind was placed between the 2 nests so I could observe and feed both sets of eagles. With the scaffolding gone, I was back to the metal pegs for climbing. Like a mountain goat, I would clamber up to the platform, push aside the plywood door to my blind, and haul myself inside, all while trying not to make any noise that could disturb the birds. In one of these photos on the left, you can see my blue jean cutoff shorts whose legs were now in use as the sleeves to restrain the eagles. In 1977, 2 of our eaglets were taken from 3 bird nests, one from Michigan, M1, and one from Minnesota, M2. But we also wanted to use captive bred birds for the first time. Patuxent Wildlife Research Center offered us 2 eaglets raised by eagle parents held in captivity there. There turned out to be a big difference between the captive bred young and the wild young, partly because of size and maturity of the caged birds. They had been fed an unlimited supply of food at Patuxent, had become used to people, and were more feisty and precocious than the wild birds. They had no desire to be contained behind bars and went out to the perch immediately after arriving. Sometimes they hopped onto the roof for a better view. The video camera had been moved to a pole next to the nest tower so it could capture both nests and record their activity back to the trailer that had replaced my cozy tent from the previous year. In July, a game of musical chairs was in order. All 4 eaglets were still confined in their nests when I was told I would be welcoming a new arrival. A 3rd eaglet with a broken leg had been discovered and rescued by the climbers in Michigan when they were securing our eaglet M1. The injured bird, whom I called M3, was sent to the Vet College of the University of Minnesota, where he was treated and rehabbed. He was now ready to be released and was on his way to me. Since the 2 Patuxent birds and M1, the female from Michigan, were ready to fledge, I opened the bars on one cage so they could come and go. In the other cage, I put M3 in with M2, the male from Minnesota. We will hear about M3 later in this talk, but for now, suffice to say, he was the calmest and most endearing of all the eagles I cared for. The secrecy surrounding the Eagle Project was well kept during the first year. Everyone was worried about vandalism if the public knew the eagles were on the ridge, and there was a little worry about me being alone with only my dogs for protection in the middle of nowhere. There was also uncertainty about whether the program would succeed, and the government folks didn't want it advertised until they were sure the eagles had at least survived long enough to leave the refuge. In 1977, such secrecy was abandoned, and I was besieged by media, anxious for a juicy story. Reporters would come for an interview armed with cameras, and I would find a simple snapshot used to lure readers to a front-page article in the New York Times about the birds and their young female caretaker. My camera-shy nature was not well suited to this new role I found myself in. Some of the notoriety was welcome, however. In the fall of 1977, I was invited to attend the New York State Fair in Syracuse to be inducted into the Iroquois Confederacy as an honorary member of the Iroquois Nation. Although I was nervous about going, it was a memory I will savor forever. I spent the day with members of the 6 nations of the Iroquois, learned about their customs and culture, and was lavished with handmade gifts from each group, including a sacred eagle feather. Apparently, I was the first female to receive such an honor, allowing the wives of the chiefs to be part of the event, an historic moment for them as well. After the Eagles left the refuge in the fall of 1977, my tenure as the Eagle caretaker was over. Although I never saw these eagles catch their own food, they seemed to be independent and had stopped returning to the fish I left for them on the tower, a sure sign that they had found a better option for themselves. I returned to Ithaca and completed my thesis, which became the manual on hacking bald eagles. By the 1980s, 9 other states had adopted our hacking procedures and were releasing eagles. The last state to do so was Tennessee, which hacked birds until 2020, exceeding even New York's total of 198. New York continued to hack eagles in Montezuma from 1978 to 1981, deciding eventually to move the project to other sites in the state to allow for breeding birds to return to their natal habitat without becoming overcrowded. As it turned out, eagles aren't as averse to nesting near each other as we had previously thought, as long as there is an ample food supply, which explains today's existence of 28 active nests within a 25-mile radius of Montezuma. As the hacking projects increased, the states had to reach further afield to find healthy eaglets for transport. While New York was using Alaskan birds by then, deciding that the genetic differences really weren't a problem, other states like Pennsylvania and New Jersey connected with Saskatchewan and some other Canadian provinces. Massachusetts brought in eaglets from Cape Breton, Nova Scotia. This cross-border cooperation between our two countries allowed many eagles to return to the skies of the northeastern U.S. Vermont waited until 2004 to launch its hacking program. Finding itself the only New England state without nesting eagles, it adopted eaglets from several other states that had viable populations by then and they were able to then restore their birds. Looking at New England and New York, we can see the dramatic increase in breeding eagle pairs since 1967, when DDT was still a threat. Only Maine had breeding pairs and just 21 at the time. By 2023, Maine still won the prize with over 800 pairs, with New York a close second with 426. Connecticut, like Vermont, didn't have a hacking program and had trouble enticing eagles to return to the state. By 2007, when the Department of the Interior announced it was delisting the bald eagle, there was only one active nest here. This graph shows that the eagles were certainly trying to produce young in Connecticut, but either the nest failed or the chicks didn't make it. After 2007, however, the population began to take off, resulting in today's population of almost 100 active nests. It is obvious that once the bald eagle discovered Connecticut's rich habitat, it wanted to stay. The distribution of active nests became widespread in towns throughout the state. This slide is very hard to read your town's names, but you can sort of see the dark blue is the active nests. The light blue were previously active nests, but they may still come back to those states. The wintering population of bald eagles grows every year, especially on the Connecticut and Housatonic rivers, requiring more management protocols as the public becomes more engaged in eagle watching. One of the most popular sites is the Chepaug Dam in Southbury, where the warm open water attracts the birds in droves. Circling back to Montezuma for a minute and the 7 eaglets I had raised back in 1976 and 77. My Wisconsin eaglets, W1 and W2, turned out to be siblings, taken from the same nest. Their bond never wavered after they left the refuge, and they went on to mate and nest near Watertown, a couple of hours away, raising 1 eaglet in 1980. But the most exciting news was that of M3, the rehabbed eagle from Michigan. I had lost track of him, along with the other eagles from that year, and could only hope that he had survived. In June 2015, I received a press release from the DEC of New York that his body had been recovered, the victim of a vehicle hit. He had a band on his leg that identified him as one of my 1977 eagles. He was 38 years old, the oldest wild eagle ever known, and had been nesting at Hemlock Lake, the last remaining eagle nest when the project was begun. Breeding for 35 years with 2 different mates, he could have produced as many as 70 eaglets during his lifetime. I was indeed a proud mama. 2 other eagles hacked by DEC later on had been identified as part of the famous trio, a family of 2 males and 1 female, who returned to nest in the refuge in 1987. New York's goal was to put 10 breeding pairs back into the skies. These maps of nesting territories every 10 years show how successful eagles became at surpassing this goal. Today in the continental U.S., eagles are most numerous in the Midwest and along the Atlantic Flyway. Minnesota has the 2nd largest population, Florida the 3rd, next to Alaska. Alaska boasts about half of the total bald eagle breeding population. The timeline of the bald eagle's recovery is defined by several key pieces of legislation and moments in the U.S. history of conservation, beginning in 1940 with the Bald Eagle Protection Act. By 2007, the eagle had recovered enough to be removed from the endangered species list, although states like Tennessee were still hacking them back to the wild for 13 more years. After 1977, I never returned to Montezuma, although I passed it on the New York Thruway and always craned my neck searching for the tower on Clark's Ridge. I followed the news about the hacked eagles as much as I could, but once Dr. Cade moved the Peregrine Fund to Boise, Idaho, merging it with the World Center of Birds of Prey, my source of information was gone. In 2019, Tom Cade died, and by 2020, I felt the story about the origins of this project needed to be told. I knew this meant returning to the marshes to see the eagles again. In November 2022, my husband and I were shocked when we drove into the refuge. When I had left almost 45 years before, there were no nesting eagles and little sign that the species would become the signature species of the refuge. Now we pass many images of eagles welcoming visitors. After I convinced the current refuge staff that I had been the one to start the Eagle Project, thanks to the expertise of the Cornell Peregrine Fund and Tom Cade, I was given the keys to the city, or the refuge as it were. I was shown the giant sculpture designed by Jay Seaman for the 40th anniversary of the reintroduction program that sits on the edge of the refuge adjacent to the New York Thruway. If you drive that road, you will see it. It's quite impressive. Accompanied by our Montezuma guides, we bushwhacked our way up to Clark's Ridge, long overgrown but still the home of the nest tower, albeit a bit bedraggled all these years later. Even the box holding the video camera was still intact. I went down memory lane with my patient listeners as they heard about the project, the start of the eagle recovery, and the role Cornell had played in its design. Today, bald eagle nests are active in the refuge with 7 bald eagle nests are active in the refuge with 14 more in the area around the boundaries. Some pairs even build 2 nests, perhaps as insurance against disaster, but I like to think they're so secure and comfortable they actually want a winter and a summer house. As we stood on the dike road that runs along Shockey Pool, where I had once rescued so many youngsters from the cattails, adult and immature eagles were flying all around us. Here I would like to share what was racing through my mind at this time by reading a short passage from the book about this experience. Several eagles fly over my head towards a group of red maples hugging the inner tributary. Adults land on tree limbs overhanging the dike road, while the immatures sit all together with their uniforms of chocolate brown, but from head to toe, perched like preschoolers in one of 2 adjacent trees. I want to call the class to order, to watch and listen and tell them where they have come from and what it means for them to be here on this day. I want to tell them about their grandparents, those stalwart 7 eaglets, and the others who followed them, whose resilience and persistence paved the way for their return to this refuge nearly 50 years ago. I want to stand here, alone with my birds, until they can grasp their own significance. The water is high, the current swift. It would be impossible to cross in this field of cattails in the distance without a boat. It would be at least chest high and require waders to navigate it. But I know it is possible. In this massive vegetation, interspersed with standing pools of water, invisible from the outside world, had once been 7 hapless eaglets, each rescued from certain disaster by a young researcher so desperate to reach her quarry, she didn't notice how deep the water was, how thick the grasses were, how many times she'd fall into the cavities below her. Had that really happened? Surely the river today must be wider, deeper, the Erie Canal forcing manipulation of the water levels over the years. As I begin to question my memories, seeking clarification at every step of my mind travel, I look up at the hillside, my hillside. Nothing but trees can be seen from down here on the dike road. But wait, there is a shadow behind the tallest ones, a bare silhouette of telephone poles, straighter and darker than trees. Something is there, but I can't be sure. Although my heart is gladdened by the sight of so many bald eagles today, I know that their success and increased numbers haven't been without criticism. Many people don't like having predators in their world, or don't understand that an ecosystem is most healthy when every trophic level is full and balanced. An apex predator like a bald eagle can have enemies among humans who find it hard to watch him take fish from an osprey, or attack its chicks, or take over its platform, or harass loons or herons who are nesting in their lake. Making room for all species is not something we do easily. Instead, we take sides, and often the underdog becomes our cause. We have forgotten that almost 50 years ago, the bald eagle was the underdog, and only with our help and vigilance was saved from extinction. I hope we can learn to champion his comeback, to be tolerant when he behaves according to his true nature, and to ensure the threats that still exist in his world are mitigated so as not to repeat the damage of DDT. And there are significant threats to the eagle we have to be concerned about. Lead poisoning results from lead shot used by hunters that drops into the mud of streams, lakes, and rivers, or is inside the carcasses of waterfowl or deer. Lead fragments are in the gut piles that humans leave behind to lighten their load as they leave the hunting area. It can also come from lead sinkers used in fishing. Lead wreaks havoc on an eagle's nervous and digestive systems, causing them to lose weight and eventually die. Shooting continues to be an issue, as do vehicle deaths. M3 was testament to this. Eagles are scavengers, so a roadkill carcass on train tracks are too enticing for a hungry eagle who will arrive to have dinner and be hit. AVM, or avian vacuolar myelinopathy, is caused by a toxin in cyanobacteria, or blue-green algae, that transfers to eagles through water birds like coots. Wind farms, although a positive resource to counter our use of fossil fuels, can also take out eagles, especially when built near their nesting sites. Immatures, as we have learned, aren't coordinated enough to avoid the giant blades when learning to fly. Other threats like rodenticides, especially eschars, second-generation anticoagulant rodenticides, used by homeowners, businesses, and farmers, are lethal to eagles who ingest the targeted rodents, unwittingly looking for an easy meal. The more insidious threats of habitat loss, which often reduces nest sites by logging or thinning of tall trees, or developing lake shores and rivers. And, of course, climate change, which affects the food supply the eagle depends on. And our latest and perhaps most serious worry, avian flu, which has taken its toll on many eagles, especially in coastal states like Georgia and Florida, where eagles eat water birds infected with the disease, but also in former eagle strongholds like Michigan and Minnesota. It is believed that this virus killed 600 eagles in 45 states in the last few years. Migrating flocks of snow geese usually winter along the Atlantic coast from New Jersey to South Carolina. On their way south from their breeding grounds in Canada and Greenland, they follow the Atlantic Flyway down the Connecticut River Valley, then along the Hudson River in New York and through New Jersey and Pennsylvania on their way south. Last winter, thousands of these geese succumbed to the avian flu virus in eastern Pennsylvania, and at least 1,000 were found dead in New York. Alarmingly, snow geese are a favorite prey of bald eagles. This bird is too majestic to be ignored again, but as we have seen with many less charismatic birds, if we take our eye off the ball, we lose the brilliant biodiversity we need to ensure our planet survives. The Bald Eagle Project was a success, its recovery extraordinary, and the lessons we have learned should be enduring. We humans owe a debt to the natural world around us. We need to respect it, conserve it, and be mindful of its future. I hope you can read Return to the Sky if you haven't already done so, but most important that you were able to enjoy the many bald eagles who have made Connecticut their home. Today we can revel in the numbers of wintering birds who visit the Connecticut and Housatonic rivers and the unfrozen waters of the lakes and shorelines, as well as the many nests that can be spotted throughout the state during the breeding season. Thank you all for listening tonight, and I would be happy if you have any questions to try to answer them.
Thank you so much, Tina. Um, I had asked you this question earlier and I put it in the chat and actually someone answered it. But for anyone who didn't see that, why did they call it hacking?
Um, well, hacking really, for our purposes, means taking young out of a nest away from their parents and raising them without the parents. Sometimes it can be done if you are captive breeding birds and you don't have the parents there. And but it's basically raising them without parents. The original part of the word actually was a wagon that they used to take up to the cliff sites. And when the climbers would go up and grab the young birds and bring them down, they would put them in the wagon and then move on to the next cliff site. But that was a long time ago, but that's where it originated. It's always been a falconry word.
Yep.
I had a question after listening to you, Tina. Thank you so much for such a moving and scientifically, explanatory presentation because I learned so much from that. But was there ever a moment when you were that young woman living in the woods by yourself with some eagles where you had a setback and you just kind of broke down and thought, I will never be able to do this? Or were you just always as positive and confident as you seem now?
No, 50 years later, you kind of learn a lot. But no, I was very much that young woman who was terrified the entire time and was constantly thinking that I was going to blow this. And there were a lot of days where I thought they aren't going to survive. I'm not going to be able to retrieve them from the marsh. I'm not going to be able to get them back up on the tower. Maybe they can't feed themselves and I don't know how to get food to them. There were all kinds of doubts that went through my mind. It was the first time it had ever been done. And people forget that it actually, there was a beginning to all of this. And we didn't know what we were doing, honestly. All the colleagues that I had around me, they knew falcons. They didn't know eagles. And so a lot of the things that we thought would happen because falcons did them, the eagles may not necessarily have done the same thing. So yes, there were a lot of terrifying moments and moments when I thought I'm going to have to call Washington and tell them I've lost one of their national birds.
Oh, that would be awful. I'm so glad it didn't happen and you got through everything all right. We have a question from Linda who wants to know what have you been involved with between the Eagle Project and writing the book? So what did you do for 50 years?
I think you have to read the book for that. It does talk a lot about what I did before I got into the project and what I did afterwards. But the short answer to that question is I taught for 25 years and I had a very big family and we bought a farm and we now run a wildlife management area. So I guess that's the short version.
What prompted you after all of this time to want to write the book? What was what spurred you to say, okay, I mean, I've had this experience so many years ago and now I'm going to put it down on paper so people can experience it with me.
Yeah, I think the Eagles did. Honestly, they motivated me because there were so many of them, and people kept coming up to me, not knowing I had anything to do with eagles, and saying, "Oh my gosh, I was on my way to work today and I saw 3 eagles fly over," and or I was on my in my lake house last weekend and there were eagles nesting all around the lake, and it just was killing me not to be able to say, "I know, I did the program that put them there,"
Yeah.
and I felt like Tom Cage should have written the book, but he was very, very passionate about his peregrines, and he didn't want to write about eagles. And when he finally passed away, I said, somebody's got to do it." And I guess I'm the one. And I really wanted people to know where they came from. I wanted them to know the true story of how it started, how hard it was to get them back so that we don't do the same thing again, and or with another bird. They're not easy to get back. It seems like there are a lot of them around now, but as I said, there are a lot of threats and a lot of things that we need to be very careful about and watch them carefully and make sure that their populations stay, either the same or going up, because it can happen very, very quickly, as we found out with DDT.
Well, thank you for writing it, and I think you were the person to write it because you were so instrumental, and being the only woman, also at that time, I think that's just another aspect of it that makes it an amazing book. You're being so involved at that time when I don't think the women scientists at that time had as much impact. So thank you.
Right. There were very few of us around during that time. So it's good that girls are starting to realize they can do science and they're getting much more excited about it.
So Brian just wanted to comment and say if anyone is interested in reading Tina's book, it's a phenomenal read, and I definitely recommend it. I recommend it as well. This was our book club read for this month. So everyone that has read the book, if you want to stay on for an extra 20 minutes, we're going to have a small book club discussion about it. Tina will leave. So if you have questions for her, now is a great time to ask them. Melissa, do you want to do the next one?
Sure. Yeah. Claudia asked, she's saying, or asking chronologically, where does the Osprey story come in relation to the eagle hacking? Like, when did the kind of movement to save the Osprey and to repopulate them or keep them going, how does that fit into the storyline?
Yeah, that's actually a great question. The ospreys preceded the eagles, but they were not hacked because there were osprey populations in the Chesapeake area. And so they were able to do egg transfers. And he could go down there and get the eggs and bring them back and put them under the ospreys that were still present in Westport, Massachusetts, and Long Island and Connecticut. And so that way they were able to have the osprey population grow sort of in a more natural way. They didn't actually have to transfer the chicks from one state to another. But it actually preceded my program because when I first arrived at Cornell, I asked if I could work with the ospreys, and I was told, oh no, that program's already underway. So it had been going on. Paul Spitzer started it. I think he was about 2 years ahead of me in terms of that program.
Very cool.
I believe,
Um,
go ahead.
Go ahead, Deb.
Sammy Barb, I believe that's Barb. She just commented about 12 years ago, two of the DEC staff involved in their hacking program gave a talk at the Adirondack Mountain Club monthly meeting of the Albany Club. Fascinating, but I don't remember that they mentioned much of the Cornell predecessor. So I was thrilled to read your book, the prequel, so to speak. It was a rare kayak trip on the Hudson when I didn't see at least one eagle during the paddle.
Well, that's great to know. Yes, the Cornell story was not very well advertised. I don't think that the Falcon Group were very good at patting themselves on the back, so the state kind of took that part.
Afterwards. Linda says, such an interesting story and excellent work. Thank you for your part in saving the Eagles and for sharing the work with us.
Thank you.
Gloria asks, are you speaking in Darien?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
Actually, in November. Yeah.
All right.
Great, great.
That will actually be live, but yes, I am.
Very cool.
Beth asks, are you still in contact with the Iroquois people? That was a very cool part of the book also.
Yes, no. The answer to that is no, I'm not in contact with the people. It's very difficult to be in contact with the Iroquois. They don't have a reservation. They don't have a central location where they all live. They're sort of dispersed throughout that part of central New York. So it wasn't easy for me to keep in contact with them after I left, and especially after I left Cornell. I did talk back and forth with the chief for the Seneca because he was the one who'd asked me to be the honorary Iroquois, and I got to know him the best. But long term, no, I haven't been. I wish I had.
I love that the women had presented to you. I thought that was amazing during that part of the book.
Yeah, That they were very emotional throughout the entire thing, and I didn't really understand why until the very end when one of the chief's wives came up to me and tears streaming down her face, and she said, "Thank you so much for coming. It's the first time we've ever been allowed to be on the stage for this event." And they were the ones who ran the whole thing for me. So it was very moving.
Yep, it was, Brian says, a very moving part of the book.
Yeah.
A lot of thank yous. A lot of people thank you for excellent presentation. They learned so much. So again, thank you so much for being with us tonight. I can't
Oh,
thank you
thank you
enough.
very much for having me. This has been a real honor. Thank you.
All
Yeah,
right.
if people are interested in reading the whole story, you've seen the cover of it, but here we go. It's called Return to the Sky, and it's Tina Morris who has written the book and has shared her experience with us tonight. Really, really great to have you here. And the book is a wonderful, uplifting, very emotionally, kind of charged book that makes you feel so good about individuals and how one person can, stumble into something that is really, really world and planet changing. So it's so great to have you here and hear your story.
Thank
Yeah, it's just really, really lovely. So thank you so much for sharing with us, Tina. And for anyone who's interested, we do have a book club every month or every 6 weeks or so. We meet and talk about books that are very much like Tina's, that are telling good stories about birds. Sometimes they're sad stories about birds, but nonetheless, they mostly revolve around birds and nature. So if you're interested as a member to join our members-only book club, please think about that. And as we said, we will be meeting. We'll stay on the call if anybody who's read the book or is in the book club wants to stick around. But thank you so much, Tina Morris, for joining us for the evening and for sharing your great story with us. And best of luck to you and the rest of your family.
Well, thank you to all of you, and also for taking such good care of your eagles in Connecticut. They like it here a lot.
Yep.
That's great.
Yeah.
As long as they don't mess around with our osprey, because we have, two different camps of
I know.
people.
I know. I don't believe me. I walk on eggshells coming here tonight because I figured that there were going to be some osprey lovers out there who were going to go after me. But, it's the balance of nature. And
It
I've
is.
seen ospreys go after eagles, so it does work both ways.
It does, yeah. Well, thank you so much. Thanks, everyone. If you're, again, if you're a member of the book club or you'd like to stick around for the book club conversation, you can. But if you're not, it's 8 o'clock almost, and you're free to go enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you,
And again,
Tina.
thank you, members, very much for all that you do for Connecticut Audubon. So thanks.